All right. So the things that I wanted to look at today is something I wanted to try already for a bit, but didn't have time to do just yet. And so our agenda will be, first of all, like we're going to look at standalone applications and monorepos. And now this is something which I'm going to experiment a bit as part of my work at NX. So NX is obviously will be a big part today. Like we will basically work in NX the whole stream. And so first of all, we will give a look at what is NX, especially from the point of view of monorepos, because I think that might be relevant for those of you that haven't yet used NX or seen NX or that don't have a clear idea in mind what it does. Then we will have a look at standalone applications, or let's standalone app NX workspaces. So what is standalone apps? Like what is this? Is that? And then I'm going to create such a standalone app and then migrate from such a standalone application to an NX monorepo. Right, so this is always an NX standalone application to an NX monorepo. And the reason is this might be a common use case. So what I expect people is that a lot of them will start with this type of setup in general, because when you start an application, you might not go immediately full into monorepos. And so you might probably go this route. And then at some point you see, oh, hey, we have a second application. We want to add a second app there. And so then you go into that actual monorepo part. And so we want to have an upgrade path there. We can already mention it right now. We'll kind of dive a bit deeper into it later. But basically right now, there's no automated migration path. So NX is known for having automations and scripts in place. So that isn't there right now, but this is coming. And so part of my experimentation today will be also might be useful for implementing such a migration path and get a feel basically what it looks like or what we need to change. So I'm actually quite curious how this works out. Actually, especially about talking about standalone applications. Yesterday I was at the stream from Taylor. And so yesterday we had a stream on Twitch where we talked about NX in general and monorepos. We didn't come as far as standalone applications. So this stream is ideally, and this wasn't planned at all, the follow-up of the stream that we had yesterday. So if you want, definitely check out this video. Let me actually drop it into the chat. So for those who want to follow up later, can do that. And so you can have a look at what we talked about yesterday, because we talked about a lot of the monorepo stuff yesterday already. So let's get more into the topic. So as mentioned, today we're going to speak about NX. Big disclaimer, I'm a co-contributor there, so I work there. What is NX? NX is, as we say here, like it's a smart, fast, extensible build system. Now that sounds initially something like, oh, is it like a replacement for Webpack or something like that, which is not the case. So NX is basically tooling around that helps you manage or trigger your builds, your tasks, your lint. So it's kind of, if you want a task scheduler, but that's only the very basis of NX. On top of it, there comes other tooling and stuff that we are going to explore actually a bit today. And monorepos are a big part of NX. In fact, if you go to the docs, you see already like first part here is like, what is package, like create a new package-based repo with NX as a tutorial, create a new integrated repo with NX as a tutorial. And then there is already those standalone apps. Those are pretty new. So if you haven't heard about them just yet, that's perfectly fine, because I think we announced them 2 months ago, so around January, approximately. So they're pretty new, but like here are some tutorials, and most of those tutorials also have videos attached, which is pretty nice. So depending on whether you're more the video person, you can check out the video first or just walk through the actual tutorial. So how do we start a new NX workspace? Let me straight dive into that. Where is my terminal? Create a new window. So we have everything kind of clean up a bit. All right. So as mentioned, NX is kind of known for the monorepo stuff. And there as well, there are two types of monorepos. There's the monorepo where you just set up a yarn PNPM NPM workspace, which is pretty lightweight. You can do everything with just yarn PNPM, but then only pull in NX if at all, right? You don't have to, but usually you pull it in for performance reasons, right? And so if I go here on dev.to/NX, there is an article which I wrote almost already over half a year ago, which is about setting up a monorepo with PNPM workspaces, which is something that is built into PNPM, and NPM and yarn have the same thing, so you can totally also leverage those. And then I can explain at some point where you then start installing NX on top of what you have already, just for speeding up things, right? So NX does really a minimal thing there. Speeds up things, does a couple of other nice developer utilities, and that's it. It stays mostly out of your way. That's one approach. The other approach that I'm going to use now is the integrated monorepo approach, which is more automated, pre-packaged if you want, batteries included, like there are different terminologies for that. So let me create such a workspace. And all you need to do there, and I actually just noticed I didn't screen share at all the whole time, which is perfect. But it didn't show anything super relevant. So basically, this is how you create a new NX workspace, right? This is the command, create NX workspace latest, and let's call this Integrated Monorepo. And when I launch this, it will ask me in the latest version because I haven't did install locally just yet. And then you see it asks me a couple of questions. There's exactly this package-based and integrated monorepo, which I've just shown on the website here on our docs, but you couldn't see because I didn't share my screen. So here you basically have those two different kind of tutorials. As mentioned, there's on dev.to/NX, the PNPM article, which also goes into that direction. I'll include those in the streaming notes, so which by the way will be on my YouTube channel, which is linked here in the video. You see it basically somewhere in the banner below. The recording will be up there, so you can always follow up then. But basically what I want to do is create such an integrated repo now, because we want to go from the standalone setup to the integrated repository. So I want to show first the monorepo part, because that is what NX is usually known for. And then I will show you the standalone part, and just to make it clear like what is the difference there, and then we will do the migration. So let me create here my React app. Let's just call it demo app. Sure, let's use Vite, just CSS. Let's not go with NXCloud for now. You can see here the monorepo got created. There are a bunch of interesting links which you can then follow up in terms of tutorial. But I want to jump into the integrated monorepo here and have a look what that looks like. All right, so let me pull that over here. Let me make it a bit bigger. All right. So since this is a monorepo, you can already see the structure here. We have apps and libs. So this is where we host our applications and where we host our libraries. And we have chosen during the startup, what I did is I chose to go with React. So you can see that here I chose integrated, then basically used the React preset. And so it did set up already my monorepo in a predefined way where it works best with React. And so you can see that also if you go here in the dependencies, you will see like the React types, you will see the now React plugin, which is the NX plugin for React to provide some automation around React. And obviously there's React itself installed. Plus, since I chose to use Vite, you'll also see a lot of the Vite stuff in here. You can also choose Webpack, which is perfectly fine. But this is basically what I went for in this setup. We also got an application pre-generated. And so this is a React application. If you go in here, you see there's the app component. There's also some pre-generated component. And we could actually just go ahead and run this. And in NX, you always do that by running like npx nx, the target you want to run. So basically the start or serve your application. So that is serve. And then the app name. The app name in this case would be demo app. And so if I run this now, I should get here demo app bootstrapped for me. So here's the demo component we just saw. And obviously all the stuff, the usual one, like live reloading and whatnot, works. Let me actually go here. Hi stream. And so this is something that obviously works, and you can see it here printed out. Cool. So in terms of running, how do I know what that surf here is about? Or why is it surf and not start? You see here, one thing that people, especially in Integrated Monorepo, are kind of a bit like, how to say, confused initially, is there's no package JSON. There is just one single package JSON at the top here, which contains all the dependencies. And that's why in such an integrated monorepo approach that NX uses compared to the package-based approach that it also supports, there's a single version policy here. So all the dependencies will be up here. You can have a package JSON here and NX will read it, but it's not necessary. Instead, what you have is this project JSON, and the project JSON is, I say, it's kind of an advanced version of the package JSON, in the sense that you see similar scripts in here, like the build, serve, preview. Like these are kind of your NPM scripts that you would have, right? So in a package JSON, here at the top level, we don't have any scripts, but they would be kind of equivalent to what these provide, but obviously they give more structure, right? So here, for instance, for the build, you see there's something that's called an executor. An executor is nothing else than a function invoked on this NPM package, which already got pre-installed. So it runs the build that this package provides, and that then knows how to leverage this information, obviously the source code and everything, to produce an output with Vite. At the simplest way is probably just launching node process behind and instructing Vite to build the project. So it's kind of a wrapper around it with some more metadata than you would usually have, let's say, in a normal NPM package-based package JSON script. And so that's also why we have here surf, and this is how I know that I can invoke here basically npx surf to run it. Similarly, I could just run build demo app, and this would build it now with Vite, right? All right. So why is such or how do you develop in such a monorepo usually? So it's when you develop your application normally, you just usually split it up into subfolders in here directly, right? So you would probably do something like, let's say, greeting component. Let's start super simple. You just call greeter or greet message.tsx. And then here you would have your component, right? So let me just go with, here was one to be faster. But what we would have here is, we don't need any styles, but we would have our greeter component, which obviously doesn't have anything here. And we could just do something like hi, right? And wave. Perfect. Then here we have the greeter component. And this is then how we export this. And so now we can go in here and import it. And now here we would go to greeting. And this would be the greet message. And so here, then I import the greeter component, and I would just use it here, right? Super simple, no big stuff. Let me also clean up this here. And then let's launch the application. Let's again go here, and we would see our message. So this is how you develop inside just such an application, right? So you would keep creating such folders just for giving things a structure, right? And that's when you then, usually the folder names in general are usually built up based on your domain areas, right? So if you have a bigger application, those would be the names of your domain areas, and then you would basically use those to build up your application. Now, in such a monorepo or NX workspace, what we usually recommend doing is, instead of creating these folders, because that can become very messy and big, create a library. Now, people might say, well, this is weird because I don't, like, this greet message is very specific to the actual like application here. It's not something that I would want to share or publish somewhere. But that's not the point actually here. Like it's just for pure structuring if you want. And so I can go here and generate a new library. Now, I'm going to use the command, but what I also always highlight is there's NX console, which is like a Visual Code plugin. And as of today, we have also an IntelliJ plugin, which you can use. And so this basically just facilitates the generation part, because if you don't know the commands, you can just right click and say generate or generate library here. Choose the plugins that you have installed, in this case, most React and JavaScript, and then have a form where you fill out the various things, right? So we could even like say here, this is the greeter library. We have vtest as a unit testing. We don't need any bundling. You can see down here live updating of where it goes to generate and where it generates that. And you can also like either just run it now or copy the command. Let me actually copy this one, run it also so we can see what gets generated. But then let me also here show what the command would look like. So what you would have is like NX generate, or you can just shorten it with G. You have the actual plugin name that is installed. Then you have the name of the generator. This is basically a code generation function, right? You give it then all the parameters it needs, and this would then create the output that we have just seen. So using NX console is much more straightforward, especially if you begin with NX in general. Like it's so easy to discover all the various toolings without having to kind of go to the docs and back and forth. So what did we do? We created a new library here in that greeter, like this new greeter library. We have already a couple of components. This is just pre-generated. And a library is always structured where you have basically the setup itself. Again, you see a project JSON. So what you can do with this library, which is linting, testing. If it is buildable as well, you can also build the library, like pre-build it, but it's not necessary. And then in here you have the source code. So this is the public API of the library where you export to the outside what others can consume. While in here you could potentially have the components that are just local, right? So for instance, here I have this greeter component, and then up here I have the greeter message. And so I could go ahead and say, let me just move that greeter message down here to the greeter library. And so no, I don't want to update imports right now because it probably would mess it up. And so I have still that greeter component. Let me just see whether we don't have a conflict here. No, we don't. And so I could say the greeter here that is exported is actually not what I want to export, but I want to just export my new greeter or greet message. That's the component that I want to export. And this one here instead can be private within that library, just to show you how you can kind of control that public interface. So now that we have this library, one thing that also happened, which I didn't show just yet. Let me just close here a couple of different things. It looks like it tried to update my moving around of that greeter message. So what happened when I generated the library is that in the tsconfig base, I got such a TypeScript path mapping configured. And so this is based on the monorepo name here, which is Integrated Monorepo, and the actual library name. And it just points to the index.ts file. And the main advantage here is that now I can use this to import it without having to provide paths to that component, right? So this is no more, right? So instead what I have is the following, where I just import it from that greeter, and then I should still have the greeter component, right? So now you see we imported from what looks almost like an npm package, but it's actually just a locally linked one because it lives in the same kind of setup in the same workspace, which is why it becomes kind of a monorepo if you think about it. And so I have it in here. Let me again serve our demo app. But if we didn't mess up anything, it should still serve just fine. Yeah. So we still see it, but now that greeter functionality is kind of exported, extracted. We don't have anything in here anymore, so we can delete it, but it's extracted in its own library. And so you can see how we can create such modularity, right? And then obviously in a second moment, if I have another application in here, I could actually just go ahead and generate one because it's so easy. Let me create like React app. We'll still vt, just go. And so now we have another application here, which is our React app. And we could just go ahead now and assume like the greeting component is something that is shareable within the monorepo. We could go in here and just import it, right? So in the very same way, let's say this is now React app. We can import a greeter component. Copilot is really useful here. Right, and so now instead of running the demo app, I serve my React app. That's how I call it here. And so again, on 4200, now I see already the React app being served. So you see, this is the shared component. It lives in that local monorepo, but is shared among these two. So this is an integrated NX monorepo. You see, the whole point about integrated is because there's all this tooling around. So there's these generators, there's that automated like tsconfig path mapping and all that stuff. That is just provided in an integrated NX monorepo. If you don't like this, well, you choose a package-based one with NX, right? But their NX does nothing else than run your package JSON scripts. So that's kind of the difference. So let's go to, let me actually commit this so I have a backup here. But what the goal here of today is basically standalone apps, right? What we did now is briefly what is NX monorepos, especially integrated monorepos, right? So we created this example there. So what are standalone applications all about? And you can actually, let me just plug this in here real quick, because I also invest a lot of effort into the NX DevTools channel. So in here, you will already find videos about standalone applications. So there's one, for instance, for Angular standalone apps. There's the one for React standalone apps. There's also at some point further down, I think here in general, the intro of what a standalone app looks like. And so have a look at those. There's like, we keep pushing out new videos, almost one per week, if not two per week. So this week was crazy, the amount of videos that we pushed out. So it's a valuable resource where you can get more into that type of stuff. But the whole point of a standalone application, or the standalone application support that we introduced, was to give people the opportunity to leverage all the tooling that NX provides, but not having to use like the monorepo, like not having to create a monorepo. Because even so, though we could just use this setup, never create a second application, just use the one that we have here, it would work perfectly fine. And we actually know a lot of folks that actually do exactly that. They want to just have the generators and all the tooling around it, the easy way of developing stuff and pre-configured nature, but they always just have one single application. So we were like, well, why not kind of allow them to do just that, right? Because even though there's apps and libs folder here, they're not like, you could rename them. I think there's a property where you can actually provide the workspace defaults. Let me see. I think it's workspace layout or something, which, yeah, exactly. You can go basically into your application, into your NX.json and say workspace layout where my apps here is called demos and the libs here is packages. So this is already flexible in the sense that you can name it more or less however you want. NX will be able to discover them pretty easily. So let's have a look how the standalone setup looks like, because it's very similar to what we have here. Let's create a new tab here, new virtual desktop, and let's then again use create NX workspace, standalone React. Here you see like already old demos, which I created like for testing. And so here now, instead of choosing one of the monorepo approaches, I choose standalone React app. Again, I get to choose whether I use Vite or Webpack. So let me go with Vite again, CSS, no caching for now in terms of remote caching with NX Cloud. And let's get this set up. So this is basically also, while this is generating, this is also kind of a replacement, or is actually a replacement for create React app if you want, because if you go to our channel on nx.dev, on our YouTube channel, there should be a video. Let me see whether I can find it. Which is when that whole Create React app drama happened. Yeah, here it is. It is Create React app dead. I don't know, maybe you saw that whole drama around Create React app not being like a valuable approach for starting a new application, because it has a bunch of problems, like with Tailwind, for instance, where post CSS wouldn't work, and there's like, it's not something which you would want to use, but it was still recommended on the React beta docs. And we had already a Create React replacement for a couple of years where you could automatically migrate to an NX workspace. And so even now, if you have Create React app, all you need to do, let me actually make this bigger. You can just go into a Create React app and run npx NX at latest, usually, in it. And this would figure out where that you have a Create React app, and it would go and migrate it to an NX standalone React setup. So the thing which we are going to explore now. In general, you can run this command even on Monorepos, and it would add NX on top of the existing Monorepo, just to provide an easy and way in to migrate and provide value with NX. So that just as a side note. So here, meanwhile, it got generated. So let me go in here and say standalone React. And let's see what this looks like. All right, so immediately the structure down here, so prettier and dslint, ignore and whatnot, is pretty similar, almost identical, right? So if we look here at the Monorepo, you also have the editor config, nx.json, tsconfig base JSON. There's just a tsconfig JSON here. So because there is no base in that sense, right? So what you have here basically is almost identical what is within such an application, right? So you see the Vite config here, these three, tsapp, tsjson spec, project JSON index, HTML stuff. And here, that is just at the root level, right? So it's very, very similar from that perspective. So why such a standalone application? Well, because I don't necessarily want a monorepo, right? So I just want to start with a single app. And again, now I can just run it the same way. I can run nx-serve. There would still be the project JSON here with all the targets, which we have seen before. So they're still here. The difference is now I don't need to give it a name because there's just one. So if I run nx-serve, it would just run. Similarly, I think there's in the package JSON, there's also script, right? So you can also just run npm start and it would run the nx-serve command for you. And in a similar fashion, let me pull this over, you would have the window rendered, right? So what is the difference now in the whole development aspect? Well, not really any big difference because I can leverage the same tooling, and that's the whole point. So I can create libraries as well. Similarly, as we did here in the integrated monorepo, where we split up our, if you want, monolithic code structure here into libraries, I can do exactly the same here. So I can go and say, create a new folder. Let's actually call this modules, or let's call it features. So these are my features or functionalities that I implement, and I just create a new folder. And then I run the generate command again. So I want again to have my React library. I want to call it again greeter. The directory now where I want to have that, otherwise it's being created at the root level. I want, which also fine, but I prefer kind of to bundle it into a subfolder somewhere, is features. And so by the way, you could also create multiple of those. So I could have features, I could have utils, I could have it at the root level. What I'm going to do now is just have a features library here, a features directory. I can also do a dry run. A dry run is useful because it shows me what would get generated without actually touching the file system. As you can see here, it's just a dry run, so no changes were made. Here's everything still kind of clean. but it shows me exactly like what it's going to do. Like it's going to update annex.json, it's going to create a bunch of files because I need them, and then it's going to create here the various folders within that features folder. So it looks like it does what I want. So let me just run it. Again, I choose vtest, don't need a builder. And now I get here basically my features folder. I have here the greeter component in here, which is here. It's named a bit weirdly because it composes basically the name of the folder and the name of the library for creating a component. I think this is something which potentially we could change, because you would just want to have like greeter as your component, right? So you wouldn't want to have all the others. So here's greeter props, which you can have and whatever. So here, welcome to greeter. Let me actually move that out. All right, so we have our component. We don't need to necessarily go and change it much more. Again, we have the same functionality of being able to export it to the outside world via that index.ts public API. And then I can still go, as usual, to my application here. There's still an annex welcome component and import it here. So I can still have here my greeter. And if I go down here to understand what the mapping looks like, you see it has here this structure. All right, so it used just the name of the application, which I gave it as standalone React, features, the folder, and greeters, the library. So I can go and import it from that. All right, and then here have my greeter, and then import it up here. Let me serve the app, and it reloads here already, and I see here the component. So the whole purpose here is now that you can see how I can modularize the whole application, because now I can create one of such libraries per larger domain areas. Like I can really structure it however I want, but it provides me a lot of good benefits in terms of modularizing my application. One thing also, which I didn't show before, is you can run the graph on this. Like NX has a graph behind the scenes for optimizing things. And so you even have that, right? Now it's not very interesting here because we really just have one application and like here the application, the library, and the end-to-end tests for that application. But I could go ahead and just say, create another one, which is like our products, right? It's our products library, which is Vite, and it should have a component somewhere there. And then I can go from my products, which is already here. Let's see what component it creates, feature products. And I could here import feature products as well. And so now if I run the graph, I could actually also have launched it in watch mode. Now that I see it here, we see now we have this structure, right? And so this can be very interesting. It's a nice side effect, right? It's not something you just do it for this purpose, but it's a nice side effect because at that point you can easily modularize your application and also visualize how the modules look like. You can even impose restrictions between which one can import which other one, which is a feature, again, that is useful in the Monorepo, but can then also be useful in such a standalone setup. All right, but keeping time in mind, we are already approaching the hour. What we wanted to do is the migration, right? So we have now both of them created. We have the standalone app, we have the integrated monorepo, and we want to see, can I convert my standalone app now to a monorepo as we had before? Because that is a migration path which definitely will come as a generator. So I imagine you can at one point do in your standalone app, NX generate, I don't know, probably NX as the scope or in our workspace, probably NX, something like that, that says upgrade to monorepo. Something similar along those lines, however we want to name it. And that would then transform it such that it becomes a monorepo. But let's see what we need to do now to actually do it ourselves, right? So standalone app, let me commit this. And now let's see. So the structure again is flexible, right? So we could have whatever monorepo structure we want. We could also just have a packages folder. Now I want to go just so that we get to a similar structure what we have here in the plain default setup. I want to go again with an apps and libs folder. So let's start with that, right? Let's do apps and let's do libs. And so this would be where we then host our applications and libraries. Now, one thing I wonder is whether I could just move those features. Because NX has a generator, because I could obviously drag it over, but that would also mean that I would need to go and, for instance, the tsconfig here would need to be updated, right? So because then it would be no more here in the features greeter, whatever, but it would be under libs greeter or features greeter and so on. And so for that purpose, NX has a command again generated that's called move. And the move one should allow me now to move this feature to libs. This is already interesting. Like max call size to libs greeter. Let me see. So this is now where we go into untouched territory because I don't think we ever experiment with that. So the move command here seems to have some issues. Let me see what happens if I don't use libs, but I just want to move it to some like modules greeter. Let's see. Okay, so that would work. Oh, this is interesting. So given that apps and libs are already something NX knows, I guess, in the generator, if I just give it modules, it would automatically go and move it into a libs modules. Let me remove that libs folder, just out of curiosity. So what happens if I do it like this? All right, so in this case, it would move it directly to features. So it looks like this generator here, once you have the libs folder, it probably uses it as a distinguisher to understand whether it's an integrated monorepo. Which, it's interesting. I'm not sure whether this is actually behavior which should be there, because I don't have any workspace layout here. So it should actually use those layout properties rather than just trying to figure out where things should be created. But anyway, let me just then create a libs folder again because we want to have it in there. So let's leverage that. And let's have it create this thing here in features greeter. Because that would then mean that it deletes my features greeter tsconfig and moves it into libs features greeter. Now, maybe in this case, I don't even want to distinguish between features or not because it's already distinguished via libs. And so you can see now it would move it this way. So let's try. It is no more here. It is now in the libs folder. I assume the tsconfig base has been updated. So you can now see standalone greeter as an import, like the import path is also updated. What does that mean for my application? Does it still? Yeah, perfect. So it also updated here the actual import path. So you can see, it should show me the actual difference here. Yeah. So you can see how it changed it as I moved it with the generator. It also changed all the imports in my file. So this is actually amazing because it uses an AST parser to go through all the files and rename it. Or maybe it did even like a very stupid search and replace. I would need to go and check the generator. But actually this is pretty good because now I can do the same thing here with my products. So I can just say generate move, feature products is the one, which is fine. And then I want to just move it to products. Again, this experience here is kind of weird, I think, because it shouldn't, it is not intuitive why this would then go to libs products, right? So I would rather prefer to say something like that, libs products, instead of having it somehow be inferred. I think this might be still an artifact from us, not like the move generator might not be 100% working on those standalone apps, or on those mixed scenarios where you have already libs and apps folders, but you're still in a standalone setup. And because it's mentioned, we are doing some sort of migration here, so it's legit. So I move it. Nicely, it also deletes the features folder apparently. So because there's nothing more in there, so it figures, let me just clean up everything, which is awesome. I like that. I didn't know it would do that. Because now I have the libs folder already in place, right? Our tsconfig is rewritten. Our app tsx part here is already perfectly fine. So it also updated all the products. I could still probably run nxsurf. Let me see. Yeah, still works. This is awesome. I think this might go smoother than expected. So the libs is already done. Let me commit this. So we have the lib structure already. Now the next part is the app structure. And this might turn out to be a bit more difficult in the sense that we need to now pick up here the individual files that need to be moved into this apps folder. Now there's different ways I could do this. Since there's no generator yet that moves it into my application, it wouldn't possibly know like how should I name the app, right? Because I need to give it a name, and I could just name it React app, similarly to what we have here, right? And then move the individual files in, which works. Let me actually try to do that and then see what that means, because I assume I could also just generate a React app in there with Vite support and then just override the files with what I have, which would be easier, right? Let's actually go with that. But you could totally do it manually as well. So I'm going to generate an app here. This is a React application. Let's call it React app because that's what I wanted to be named in the end. Let me see what is in the project JSON here. There's standalone React. Yeah, we will probably need to change this and rename it afterwards, but which is fine. So I have this in here. It's React app, run it. We get the end-to-end test generated. Now the end-to-end test is actually this one here, right? We have it already for our application. And if we look at this, let me see. Can I jump to this? Yeah. So I'm just wondering what it uses to serve up here my... Oh, it uses here the standalone application as the build target. Oh, right. Yes. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So it uses the serve target, it uses the standalone React, which is here the project JSON for my React application to boot it up. So we need to adjust that as well. But the point being is now I have this React app in here. I can already do nx serve now and should be able to say React app. Let me see how that one is being called, is React app. And this would work. All right, so I have it here. It's loading. This is my React app. This is the new one. And so now I should be able to just go and replace files. Obviously the whole index.ts file, the whole app folder here, this is exactly the same. So I can really just go and move this out. I move this source folder, probably to the public folder, same thing, right? I can just go and this one as well, I guess. This one would be the same as here. Let me just quickly look at them to see what the difference is. So here we have the STSX. Huh, this is interesting. I don't know why it is being combined here in this way. because this looks already as if it was enough. There's no need, because it looks like this is the combination of these two, right? Like it has the TS files, has the TSX JS files, JSX, but then it also creates these ones here. Something to look into, because then here we have just the extension from the ESLint base, which is here as well. Here the path is already good, so I might probably not want to go and override this, but rather I just leave it as is. So I'm going to move in here these two into the React app. So now I have here all my components in here. I still have these two, which previously were the root. An advantage here is, like, since these are all abstracted over those TS config path mappings, the TypeScript path mappings, I don't have to adjust any routing here, like in the sense of navigation, right? It's not a relative import. That's a big advantage. So moving around is pretty easy. I shouldn't need, this is fine. This is obviously fine as well. This is like my base config. And I think the advantage also, the fact that I used the generator to generate a new application here is actually something I would highly suggest, because this already creates me all these type of files, which otherwise wouldn't be there. Because if you have a standalone project, this is the one that you have. Like, there's no need to have another one, I think, at least. Oh, it looks like it's being created anyway, so yeah. But I would highly suggest anyway to go with such a setup, because then you can just get a lot of the stuff created for you without you having to worry too much about creating them manually. And again, you could always go and first generate a new default Monorepo and then just go and compare between the two, and then figure out basically what are the differences, and then just copy over those files. Because if you didn't touch them, you can just overwrite them, right? Because that will be the right way for generating them anyway. Cool, so now I have the project JSON in here. The project JSON, in this case, it is the same, right? I didn't touch it at all. The only thing is the name here. So if I want to keep that name, I would want to go and change it. But otherwise, I can just leave it, like leave the one that got generated for me in here. If I have some custom commands, I could copy just over those and then adjust them there in the React app. But in my case, I'm just going to drop this one completely because I don't need it, right? So it's not something which I want to pull in. This is just a README. This is the app config, TS config, those as well, like the app config, this one and the spec one. All of those are already in here. So they have been created for my local application here, so you can see them. The advantage is these are already adjusted, right? So these are already in a way that they respect the structure where the new project lies. So for the base extension, they already jump out 2 levels and then import the root level 1, right? So again, for this purpose, I'm just going to delete these, like this, and also the spec one, because I have them already and I didn't touch them. That's obviously, like, these are 2 brand new projects. So obviously the migration is much more straightforward. But still, you can, you would have to just do a file comparison of what you added on top of the existing configuration. And if you manipulated that, then you could just obviously extend it or use yours and adjust just the paths, which would also not be super hard. I imagine I could drop this one. It shouldn't be required because the root here, let me see. It looks like it's still required. So this is probably something that with the library came in. Never looked into why the bubble file is being created here, but it makes sense because the root is still the same. For the integrated Monorepo, root would always be also the Monorepo root, and here obviously for standalone apps, it's the same thing. Cool. Do I have anything else left? Index.html file. Did I copy that over? I don't think so. It will be the same because we didn't change anything. So this is standalone React, and here is probably React app. So yeah, I could just overwrite that, but in this case, again, I'm just going to remove it. README TS config. There's the vite config here. Again, we didn't change anything. If we did, I would go and copy this over to my local application here. But now, since I have already one generated here, and again, here, the big advantage of having the app pre-generated, I have all those files already here. And so I don't need to kind of go and move files around override. But it's highly recommended, obviously, to verify that you didn't change this. So again, in this specific setup, I could just delete this. And now I think we are pretty much already at the level where it's very much the same as in a Monorepo setup. So if I go in here with integrated one, we have the editor config, ESLint ignore type of thing. Where's editor config? I didn't see that one. Don't we generate it? Huh, that's interesting. Prettier is here, but the editor config is not. This is something I need to check out, whether we don't actually generate that in the standalone React app, which I think would still be valuable, right? Like this is not something that's Monorepo specific. Cool, but the rest looks very much already in place, right? Let me just go and try and serve React app. All right, let me see. The following implicit dependencies point to non-existing projects. All right, so this is a good point because obviously we now removed the project JSON at the root. So there's no more standalone app, standalone React anymore. And the project here is end-to-end, right? The end-to-end project here refers to an implicit dependency, which is standalone React app. And the reason is, let me see, I don't have the graph up anymore, but basically the end-to-end application doesn't have a direct import of React app, right? Because usually it just runs the dev server or the pre-built output of the application it tests and then runs the end-to-end tests against those. And so there's no need actually to have a direct reference. But at the same time, if then basically we are going to change our React application, the end-to-end test should be triggered, right? So the end-to-end test should only run if we change our application. So therefore there needs to be a kind of like a dependency relation between those, which is then created via those implicit dependencies. So you have to give this manually. Again, here, I would obviously need to go and move this whole project in here, which you could actually do. Let's do that just as an exercise, because again, here we didn't change anything, so I could just drop this, maybe just copy over the fixtures. But let's assume that we did change Cypress config, which is not completely unreasonable. We did add maybe some commands which are in here. So I would just go ahead and remove this application. The end-to-end apps are pretty independent, so I could actually just delete the folder. But let's actually go and remove it with the generator. So before we had the move generator, there's also the remove generator that can just remove this app now. This is interesting. So it also fails because it also obviously verifies the thing. Let me see whether I do force, whether it would run. No, it wouldn't, because it says it's an inconsistent state. So how should I run this? Let me see. React app end-to-end is the project I want to remove. It is weird because this shouldn't actually happen. So this is an X showing a global configuration error, which is happening on the end-to-end project. And so that's why I cannot remove this one here, which to some degree makes sense. Now for the remove generator, like NX doesn't treat the remove generator in a particular way. So that's why it also fails. But like obviously given that I am removing something, there shouldn't be any error because I'm just deleting stuff, right? But to fix it, let's just fix this setup here. So instead of having here the standalone React app, we have now the React app. And this is also pretty cool. You see, it gives me auto completion, which is again some feature that NX console here gives me, because it knows this is an NX workspace, obviously being an extension for NX. And so it knows the projects and figures out here it is. Now I also need to change them here. So I have this one here, React app, right? So I have all these standalone. Let me try to find, no, there's no one left. Perfect, because now what I did is just rename everything from Standalone React App to point to this React application. And so again, let me try NXGraph because this should now work. It should show me exactly both now point to this React application. And now I can just get rid of this one, right? So now I have again a consistent setup. So I go and remove this end-to-end test, which weirdly it picks up here the React app, which is weird. It should pick up this one here because I clicked on this one. Looks like a bug to me. We should fix that. Cool. So this is the React application. It deletes it. Like this React end-to-end, sorry. And now I might want to move that one in, right? So at this point, I removed everything in here. Let me actually run this end-to-end, end-to-end. Let me see. Libs greater config. We didn't run it before, so we don't know whether we broke it now or whether it happened already before. Let me just move it in anyway for now, and then we can check what a test does. So let me move it. Same exercise as before. We moved the project end-to-end here into the apps folder. Let's see how it reacts in this way. So the end-to-end would get deleted and it would be moved into apps, which is actually not what I want. React app end-to-end. Let's see what happens if I do this. Yeah, it would move it into the apps for React end-to-end. So it's exactly what I intended. Like there's some sort of smart logic that is baked into the move and remove generator, specifically in the move generator, that if there's an apps folder, it already knows if there, like the products here have a type attached, right? So applications will go into the apps folder and libraries will automatically be going into the libs folder. There's no way you can have them outside, which I think is something we should fix because it's not intuitive. If you don't know this stuff, then it might not be intuitive at all. But anyway, let me move it in. Now I have the same structure, but with my end-to-end tests from before. Now this failed to compile. Let me see what type of scripts, because there might be some end-to-end tests pre-set up. Let me see here. There's Standalone React app. Let me see if I do something like the target here. So this is my React app end-to-end. This is the target. This is also weird. So here it renamed the target, and this should be just end-to-end. So it shouldn't rename anything else. It should be just end-to-end target, the lint target. So it should be able to say end-to-end, run the end-to-end target on the React app end-to-end test. Again here, it messed up the names a bit. So this is what I want, right? So it should run this one here. Doesn't match. Probably the testing type doesn't match the schema. Should be of type component end-to-end. Interesting. Let me see what it generates here for these ones. It looks like the move generator messed up quite a bit here for this type of setup, because here now I have the testing type. All right, could not compile, which is already a better error message. So let me see whether we can fix it. Can resolve module ts config JSON, which makes sense because it probably refers to the top level ts config JSON, which is now no more there. I wonder where that is though, because it has an extends Probably this lips greeter should be fine. This moves out 1 level, 2 levels, and then there's the TS config. Oh, there's the TS config, the base. So it was exactly this one here. So this was from the moving around that, and then afterwards deleting, it didn't capture that properly. But this is still something to be considered. I wonder why it is, because this extended not from the base one, but it extended from the application level TS config, which is up here, which we had before, which was basically the one that we now moved in here. So it extended from this one, which in turn obviously then extends from the base one. So it's again fine, but I wonder whether the library should actually depend on it. It doesn't matter a whole lot, but given that the library already has its own TS configs, it should probably depend on the base one, because these are the things that which are needed based the whole compilation aspects, not necessarily the TS config here of the application, which doesn't hurt in this specific situation, but I think that's a wrong pointer there. But anyway, we should now have the end-to-end test set up. So now it runs it and runs Cypress and fails here at some point. Unable to compile. The config file is invalid. So, oh yeah. It did also, like, our move generator wasn't the best idea ever. So it also messed up the Cypress config here. Let me just go here and copy that over, because yeah, it's exactly the same one. All right, and now it runs. It runs standalone app. Perfect. Well, now it times out, it gives an error, but that's because the test assumes certain welcome message, but we removed a bunch of components, so it doesn't work anymore, which is fine. Cool. I think that's it. So basically we went from, let me actually commit this, migration complete. So we found a bunch of potential issues along the way, but it was actually pretty straightforward. Now again, this was 2 newly generated applications, so we didn't have any kind of customization. We never customized one of those config files that NX generated, like the TS configs and stuff. So it was pretty easy. But basically the steps that we did is let me actually try to write them down, recap. All right, so the migration steps. Have been the following. Let me just move this up because this is not relevant here. So we basically have generated, we have our standalone application. That's obviously the starting point. Now, today we generated it, but we usually already have that, right? Because that's where we develop on, and at some point we come to a decision where we say like, hey, we might need another application in our whole Monorepo, because that's the point here, right? I didn't go as far, but now we have this standalone app set up, but already converted to a Monorepo. Now I could just go ahead and add our applications, because at this point, this is a Monorepo. So I have the standalone application. To migrate, I just create, first of all, the folder structure, right? So create the folder structure. This can be however you want to create that. I used apps and lips just to be as consistent with the default setup. Also because that is helpful, because I can then go back and forth and understand, hey, how does the default generated setup look like? Like what does the TS config setup look like in such a libraries and whatever? How do the paths here point and whatnot, right? So this is very useful, because then I can use that as a comparison and see where I messed up or where I need to adjust. But you can use, there's the workspace layout property. If you go to nx.dev and search for that, you will find how you can customize those folder names. So you can name them however you want. You can even just have one, packages, and have everything in there. Perfectly fine. So once you have that, we create those all, obviously, and once we have created those, we can move the libs. Now the libs initially, if you remember, we had them here in a features folder, right? Which works perfectly for the standalone application. So what I did is I used the novel workspace move generator. So the move generator, which lives in here. And notice that now workspace might disappear potentially. So it could be just NX at some point. And we'll have to see, because those are fundamental NX generators if you want to some degree. Yeah, I don't know whether it's going to be NX, but like this is something that helps you manage an NX workspace basically. So we have that move generator. Use the move generator to move the libs, like before that it was like features, like this, libraries, right? Where we had, let's name them actually, like greeter, and features products, and move them just to libs, right? For example, it then became features greeter library, became libs greeter. And I could have kept this like the folder in between, right? I could have kept it like libs/feature/greeter. And for that moving, actually, the move generator helped a ton, because it automatically adjusted the path mappings, the tsconfig in tsconfig.base.json. So that was already handled for me. I didn't have to do anything of that. Well, otherwise I would have to do that, right? It's a simple search and replace in the end, but like still, it's being managed by it automatically. And then what I did is I had to move all the single files, which are at the root level, like the source folder, into an application in here, right? And so what I did, which I think it's still, until we have an automated generator for this, I would use the application generator. Let's say use React, so it would be now React app. So you would do something like npx nx generate now React app and whatever, and generate a new app with a similar setup. So meaning that if your standalone application was Vite, you would choose Vite again, and it would create you now an empty application in that folder up here that has almost the same configuration. So if you didn't change anything in the Vite config, it would be exactly the same, right? So you don't even have to override it or adjust it. It will just work. And once you have that, you just move basically individual pieces, move like the source folder, the public folder, what else? Index.html, the vite.config.ts, all that stuff, move that to then apps and your new app that you generated in this step here, right? So just move them all in here. The move generator, and like in this case we didn't use it, but like for the end-to-end test, it didn't work as expected. Like there were a couple of weird things happening there. But at the end, what I got is pretty much a consistent setup, right? So I moved the global, let's add this as well, like the root level end-to-end test that was generated. Moved root level end-to-end test to apps, your new app dash end-to-end. This is really just if you want to have a consistent setup of how the normal default one looks like, but you don't have to, right? You can name it whatever you want. Cool. So I think this sounds pretty good. A note maybe here is check the project.json, tsconfigs, and so on for path adjustments, right? So maybe we need, like everything was actually, for those that use the move generator, everything was adjusted automatically. But for others, we had to slightly adjust the path so that it points to correct tsconfig. Like as a note for myself, basically, there was like the lib, the library tsconfig in a standalone app points to the root level tsconfig.json, which I think should point to the tsconfig.base.json. I think that would be more correct, especially if you have both of them. But that's as an aside. That's something which potentially gets fixed in the next with the next version. Cool. I'm pretty happy with it, to be honest. Again, this is right now there's no automated support, but there will definitely be automated support. So at some point we should be able to just invoke a generator as we did for creating a new application and use that for upgrading our standalone app setup to a monorepo. All right, we took a bit more than an hour, but I think should be fine. Let me see. Is there a way generator for moving a folder feature from an app into a lib? Or generating a lib, then moving the related code part? Yeah, that's more or less what we did. So there's no generator there. It might actually be interesting to potentially have one. But what we did, for instance, in the integrated setup here, is I had the code first located inside a subfolder, right? And so I just moved it. So what I did is I created a new React library in here, greeter, and then just moved basically literally the component down in here. Sorry for jumping here. I exported it again and then adjusted the import in my actual application. So it is pretty straightforward. Creating a generator for that, it would be totally possible. I don't think it would provide as much value because you would have to give it all the components that you want to move, which, yeah, sure, if it's just a folder and it's pretty auto-consistent, then maybe it even already has like a public endpoint in the folder, which some people also do as a best practice, then it could be relatively easy. But at that point, you could also just move by hand, drag it basically into the library. Like I could actually literally show it to you, right? So it takes me a second, because if I have this component, right, let's say I'm in this React application, I have here a new folder, which is called my feature. And I create here my feed.tsx and have this in here. Don't look at the names because those are obviously silly. Hi from my feature, right? So now I have it in here. What I would usually probably have is here in this application, I would import it. So I would have my feature, and here the my feature component. What did I name it? Feature component. Right, and then just link it here. Right, so this would work. I messed up the name. Oh, my feed. Yeah, that's when you don't name things properly. So this would work, right? Now, if I want to move it into a library, I would just go ahead. Either I have a library already, like this one, or I just generate one. So I just say here, library. There's a React library. Make sure you choose that so that all the configs are matched to have TSX and all that type of support. So I would call this like my feature, right? Choose whatever settings I want here. The default ones here are perfectly fine. So I have it now in here. So I would go and just move that component down into that new library, right? So let's go here in the source, lib. That's where it should live. Yeah, don't do any refactoring. No, I don't want to rename it or anything. And then I would export it here. There is already one exported, which is the default that gets generated, but I would just do something like lib my feed. This gets exported. And now I can go back to the application where I had referenced it before, which is, where is it? Up here. And now instead of having the feature component from here, I would just do my feature, right? And it would still work. So this would be how I would refactor it. So it's you can see it's pretty straightforward, as it's mostly just moving files around in the repo. But it's a good question, because that is usually how you start. And the main recommendation I have, even if you start with a standalone, yeah, exactly, we're pretty fast in doing it. But the main recommendation which I have is, even if you start with a standalone app, start refactoring in the same way, in the sense that here I have my standalone application. Well, now it's a monorepo basically, but like, even if, as we have shown in the stream today, even if you have just a global source folder where you just have one application, the whole purpose of having that with an X is to still use that library functionality where you create a folder that is called modules or domainers, my features, whatever, and you have the libs in there, right? You can even create multiple ones, but it's the whole advantage that you get is that way of structuring your application, which is not a single monolithic code base with just subfolders where people can like crazy import whatever they want deep into another folder, right? You get a much nicer structure in this way where each of these libs has this public exposure, like this public API if you want. Inside the lib, you can have multiple components, as for instance here, right? Where is it in this repo? Where before, like in this case here, my feature, right? It had already this my feature component generated, but we created this one to be moved in. But what we exposed was just that single one, right? So you can play with that kind of visibility rules that you have in place and therefore hide things from the outside. So there's much more control in here as well. Plus, an X allows you to also create rules around it. You could really say like this type of library can only import from the same type of libraries. Let's say a more complete feature library can only import from other feature libraries and UI and so on. But a utility library should never be able to import from a feature library, right? Because it's a more general purpose kind of library setup. So there's all sorts of things that you can do, which are usually useful then when you scale the code base, right? When you have multiple teams, multiple team members coding away, you get some sort of like boundaries where you can move, which then helps you create more maintainable stuff. So I think that's it for today. As mentioned, we're already a bit over to what I had planned, but that's fine. Keep an eye, go to nx.dev, keep an eye on our Twitter account as well. Let me actually plug this here. So this is our Twitter account, nx.dev.tools. This is where you would see those announcements, right? So whenever we introduce those migrations and other type of features that we push out, we usually announce them on those pages, like on Twitter, on our blog, and on YouTube. Cool. Hope this was helpful. Again, you see, where is it? Here below, you see my YouTube channel. So I will upload a recording of this later. And other than that, I will see you in the next stream, which is probably happening next Thursday or next week on Tuesday. All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.